the kind of identity that you carry around, the kind of group that you have you are part of, the kind of a group that you are uh, to identify with. So these are things that which makes language a very very important issue, and that cannot, and because of which one cannot really ignore the political importance of language. One a very good example of the identity factor. Of course, it is always all around you. You must have felt, you must have seen, and you must have heard about it, read about it, even discussed about all these things. So you see it all around you. And I speak X language, and sometimes how we adjust to the peer pressure, to the perceived prestige factor with respect to language, and so on. For example, it's very common to see one of your once your friends go off to US, and let's say after 6 months they visit their country. Apart from finding India dusty and dirty and chaotic, they will also tell you will also notice their English has changed. These are things that tell us how important language is. You will not anymore be speaking like I'm speaking now. I know Indian English. You have to gel in. You don't want to stand out in the crowd. So you must try to be as American as possible, and that one of the telltale factors of that is the language that you speak, the way you speak the language, and so on. So that is why language is very very important, and that is why it is often decoded by political forces rather than linguistic facts. So we linguists have our textbooks and books after books written as to how to define a language, how to differentiate between languages, what are the factors grammatically and otherwise. We can write reams and reams, but ultimately what decides the factor is not linguistic analysis or scientific analysis of the languages or the structures of the languages, but what the political powers, what political power is there at the center of all of this. So while Mandarin and Cantonese, as I was talking about yesterday, are thought to be two varieties of the same Chinese language, it is actually not, scientifically speaking and linguistically speaking, they are actually vastly different from each other, capable of being considered different languages in their own right. They're very, very different, vastly different, but they are considered as dialects of Chinese, two varieties of Chinese for the political, because of the political situation. Similarly, Danish and Swedish are considered different languages because they are part of different countries. However, they are mutually intelligible. Intelligible, they can understand each other without any difficulty, but they are considered different languages. Similar case for Dutch and German and many other such situations. So even when languages are very very similar in structure, in semantics, in many other factors that decides the language, they can be considered different languages rather than varieties, and the opposite also happens. So as I was telling the person yesterday, don't remember his name, this is how it really works in the real world, in the political world. So there are, however, the current situation has these days has become a little more complicated because we have multilingual speech communities. Now, these are terms that we'll be using very often. Speech communities are groups of people that speak a particular language. So let's say we have a Hindi speech community. Now, this is not homogeneous. No such communities are homogeneous to an extent, but we kind of make it for the sake of analysis, for the sake of understanding, we use the term called speech community. So even if there are different kinds of speech communities within the Hindi speech community, sometimes for the sake of analysis, we do use. So these days we have multilingual speech communities. No, there is no slide, Mansi. There is no slide today because I prepared. I had just started and haven't added all the information. Please mute, Ritesh. Please mute yourself. Okay, so then next comes the question of the idea of multilingual speech communities, and this is what is our primary interest in. So people have always moved. You see, from as far back in history as you can go, history or prehistory, maybe we may say. If you are interested in archaeology, you might be already you might have already read about. There are newer findings every other day in prehistoric how the prehistoric humans really lived and migrated, and what was the pattern of migration and so on. The out of Africa theory is now being questioned. There are many, apparently, the latest is that apparently there were simultaneously different at different places, different communities evolved and they migrated here and there, and that is why. So it's not that people just started in Africa and they moved on to different places and started and creating different features, racial features as we know them today as having. So there are many such findings that are questioning the older knowledge system. Anyways, so people have moved. That is the gist of the matter. People have moved ever since people have been there. They have moved for food. They have moved for better, possibilities. Primarily for food initially, and over a period of time, the motivating factors kept changing. So this has more often than not, brought languages in close contact. Ever since we have started speaking, people have come in contact, and as a result of which, languages have come in contact. So languages coming in contact, as I was mentioning yesterday when I was just giving a brief overview, languages coming in contact may have different kinds of outcomes. So nowadays there is also a lot of discussion in the archaeological circles that previously we thought Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did not live in the same era. They did not live simultaneously in the same time and space. But nowadays there are findings that suggest they did. Not only they did live side by side, they even interpreted. There was interbreeding. So this is how far back it goes. So languages have come in contact. People have come in contact. So what are the a lot depends actually a lot what are the motivating factors, what are the final outcomes depends on the how the communities were brought together, how the communities came in contact. So there are few reasons, primary reasons you may take note of, that more often than not these 4, 5, 6 reasons are what have brought languages and people together. One, most important, war, conquest and colonization. People have moved for colonizing other places, to to go to have to enlarge their territory in the beginning, and then when nation states and stuff like that, kingdoms started getting into existence, imperialism. You wanted newer colonies for higher better opportunities, for higher more access to more resources and so on and so forth. So war and conquest have been one of the primary driving forces for languages to come in contact, right?
Ma'am,
and
how
and
is,
yes.
ma'am, excuse me,
Hi, yes, yes,
how
go
is
ahead.
imperialism different from world conquest?
They are similar. That's why I put them together. This is one category for me. So imperialism, war,
Oh,
and conquest, they can be considered one broad category. Of course, there are finer details for sociologists to argue about, but for our purposes, they are similar. Basically, one community goes and wins over another, dominates the other, and as a result, whatever happens. So they are similar. And when these things happen, there is another kind of contact, which is the context of slavery. Slavery sometimes happens as a result of conquest, but not always. As we all know, slavery happened, transatlantic slavery, or other kinds of slaveries that happened as a result of business of looking for more. There was a financial reason behind it, rather, let's say, rather than controlling the territory as such. So what happened in India and what happened in Africa are different. So that is why the condition of slavery stands out from the war and conquest kind of a situation. So slavery is another reason, another situation that stands out, linguistically important situation of language contact, of people coming in contact and languages coming in contact. And then there is migration. Migration can be forced or it can be otherwise also. It can be voluntary. So a lot of Indians immigrate to various countries like UK, US, and so on. So migration is also another factor. Sometimes we have funny funny and not so funny outcomes of that. Some you see the white people dancing to bhangra. At the same time, Indian languages also get a lot influenced by the language of the land they move on to. So this is another migration. Migration is a very, very important reason for languages to come in contact. And then there are other less apparent, less what do you say, prominent reasons. One of them is intermarriage, which was not so common some days back, but last couple of decades maybe or so, it is now quite common. It is not anymore something strange. So a lot of intermarriages across language or across communities is also another reason why you have a different kind of outcome with respect to language contact. And then something that is very easily understandable and visible in cases like India is what we call the existence of a Sprachbund. Sprachbund is called, it's a German word. Basically, it means adjacent when languages and communities, they reside side by side in the adjacent geographical area for a very long time. It creates a situation where that is conducive for language contact at a very intense level, at a social and personal level, at a family level. For
Ma'am, you are mute.
this language is not reliable. I don't anymore know what to do. I changed the system, I changed the headphone and everything, but LAN is giving us trouble. Anyways, uh, so where was I? And adjacent geographical areas. So adjacent geographical areas, when you have, like in India, we have, for example, there are places, all of us know that the northern India is typically the home to Indo-Aryan languages, and the southern India is
Excuse me.
home. Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Can you, can you repeat the last point, that existence of something? I didn't get that sixth point.
I'm talking about it. Existence of adjacent geographical existence of various languages in adjacent geographical area. There's a technical term for it, which is called Sprachbund. I will once I upload the slides, you will get the word. But basic idea is that in a particular geographical area, adjacent geographical area, you have people speaking different languages. So in India, for example, it's a large area, but in India we have languages from different language families being spoken side by side. For example, we have languages of the Indo-Aryan family that is spoken all over the northern part of India, and almost all over southern part of India. You have languages from the Dravidian language family. Of course, we don't. These are terms that have been given again by the colonial powers. The people sometimes agree, sometimes don't agree, and that is our history is very twisted. So anyways, we as of now we agree that northern India speaks Indo-Aryan language, southern India speaks Dravidian language, northeast we have a lot of languages representing the Tibeto-Burman families, I know Sino-Tibetan languages, and also you have in the central India the Austroasiatic languages like Ho, Mundari, Bhumij, and so on. So these are the four language families. Now there are some places even within India where this mixing of people is far more intense. For example, in a place like Jharkhand, Jharkhand is a place where you have a large number of Austroasiatic languages present. You also have Hindi and a lot of Bengali speakers there. You also have Dravidian languages like Oraon, Kurukh, and so on. So this is kind of a melting pot, like it is fashionably called melting pot. Melting pot, as in people speaking different languages in the same geographical area reside side by side without any political conflicts. Political conflicts are not part of this. This is a social kind of a very fluid social scenario where it is possible to interact with each other on a day-to-day basis where people speak different languages. Now, this kind of a scenario gives rise to a very different kind of outcome, linguistically speaking. And last but not the least, we have trade factors, business, urbanization. So trade and slavery, of course, are connected, but not all trade situations give rise to slavery. So that is why I have made a separate category for trade and urbanization. What happens is often you see various people go to faraway lands and establish business contacts there, trade connections there, and as a result of which they take one language to the faraway land. So Russian traders coming to Norway and trading with the local Norwegian people is not the same as having slaves there. They didn't have slaves in Norway. So you may or you may not. So trade is also a very important motivating factor to bring people together, to bring languages together. Now, all these a few points that I mentioned, for example, one was war, conquest, colonization together, maybe you can take it. So war, basically, war and conquest. Second was slavery. Third was migration. Fourth was intermarriage. Fifth was adjacent geographical areas, existence of adjacent geographical areas. And last was trade. So these are the few reasons, most important reasons for languages to come in contact. Now, if you look at it from a higher perspective, you take a long view, and then you see that you can actually think of different types of contact because of this, because of various factors. One is what we call socially separate. People may come in contact, but that contact may remain only restricted to a particular purpose, for example, trade purpose. So what happens when people come in contact for trade purposes, they don't always take the language back home. Language contact and the results stay put to the trade situation. So this is a socially separate kind of a situation. This doesn't become a social reality. It becomes a reality for that particular purpose where we have been using this. That is one. Second is a contact that is very different, very intimate. That is a family level contact. This is where intermarriage and stuff like that happens. So this is a very different kind of a language contact. Similarly, you have another contact that is called the social contact, socially separate versus socially close contact. Social contact may you have this marketplace contact, trade, and so on and so forth, and the adjacent areas, people having living side by side, and so on. So there are primarily 2 or 3 types of contact, even if given all the reasons, that you can have a very distinct identity still maintained, or whether it allows you a more fluidity, whether it allows you to learn what do you mean by fluidity. For one, are you allowed to speak the language of the more powerful? That shows more fluid, or for example, or the less powerful. For example, I have been living in Assam for last 12 years, right? So I do speak the language, but not very well. So am I allowed to practice my own language, and I can also speak Assamese to the Assamese people, and so there is a lot of give and take, and there is no restriction as such. It is not restricted. I may use I may practice my Assamese with the office staff here, but at the same time I can use it with my friends even if they don't speak Assamese. So there is no restriction as such, as a result of which we can call it a social contact that is created because of me being in Assam for a very long time. However, there are situations where socially separate kind of contact is also there. Like I mentioned, the slavery situation. Slavery, what happens? You have a group of people typically broken down to different groups that has a master from one of the dominant groups. For example, you have English Britishers having plantations in, let's say, Africa. So you have people working in those plantations, and those people might be, part. Some of them may be Swahili speakers, some of them may be Zulu speakers, some of them might be even Bhojpuri speakers. So they have people from all over the colonies, wherever they have found, put them in, put them to work as slaves in the plantation area. Now, this is a socially separate kind of a contact. Now, why this is important is this is important because the relationship between these communities is very, very well distinct. So the British owners of the plantation have to make the slaves work, take orders from them, but at the same time, they do not have to learn the slaves' language. However, the slaves need to learn at least bits and pieces of the master's language in order to take the order. Because if they don't take order, they are they will perish. The master will not perish, right? So this is what we mean by socially separate contact. Similar things at a lesser degree may exist even in other kind of trade situation where you have people from faraway countries coming and doing business in your country and keeping it at that level only. They don't mingle with you socially. So you meet them only at the ports, at the and that is the business dealing, and then that is it. You go your way, I go my way, kind of a thing. So these are socially separate kind of a thing, kind of context. So why do we talk about these things? Because these are important in order to understand the results, kind of results that we have. So first thing first, let's talk about what happens when you have a war on conquest kind of a scenario. When one group comes to another country, another nation state or whatever, and is victorious, as a result of it, what happens immediately? Immediately, what happens is that there will be an imposition of a language that is not part of your repertoire at all. That is the victor's language, and that will become the language for wider communication. That will become the language for of prestige. That will be the language of the establishment. So what immediately happens when one group wins over another is that the victor imposes a language that is used for official purposes. So the local languages overnight, local languages lose their standard, lose their status. A foreign language becomes the language of all important purposes, be it education, be it judiciary, be it administration, and so on. So the language that is used for these three purposes is always the powerful language. This is the pointer. So in English, before that Persian was the court language, then English became the court language, or whatever you call it, official language, and we are still using English. So this is imposed on us, and we are still not able to get rid of it. Now, as a result, the minority groups have a slow shift from one language to another. This happens over a period of time through various stages. Sometimes those stages also have a stable stage of bilingualism into it, realized over a very long period of time. This needs a lot of time. So, for example, you see our case in India, English was introduced to us when the British came in, and then it took quite a lot of time. Initially, it was restricted to only the Babus, who why did they introduce English in the first place? To have a group of clerks to work for them, to use a group of people against the natives. So one group of natives will be ruling over the rest of the natives because of this particular tool of speaking the master's language. So that is how it started. So there was no bilingualism as such at that point of time. Of course, over a period of time, the British successfully created what came to be called, it is still called the elite, the Brown Sahib. So they still rule. In India, the Brown Sahib still rule. The English-speaking crowd still rules the rest. So this is how it starts. But now English has become a language of the masses. So this is when we say that we all are bilingual in our own language, L1 mother tongue and L2 English. But if you notice, all of you will be using more of English than your mother tongue over a period of time. So initially you will be speaking your mother tongue and fluently speaking both the languages in all domains. So that is what is a perfect kind of a bilingualism. However, what will happen over a period of time is that once you have moved out of your home, you are in hostels, and English is the language for for all kinds of communication, formal, informal, and everything. You will have a gradual shift towards English, and slowly but steadily you will lose grip over your mother tongue. So much so, there are people who are very proud. I don't speak my mother tongue very well. And what is worse is that many of the present generation, they cannot read and write their mother tongue. So that this is what we mean technically as a shift to the conqueror's language. So mentally, you may even long after the conquerors leave, this kind of things continue to happen. So this is why it is important to understand the kind of contact. Second is immigration. When immigration happens, what happens? One population moves into another. Now, there is a very significant difference between these two situations. In conquest, one small group goes and conquers a large group. And then, because they are powerful, they impose their language. In migration, immigration, the opposite happens. And again, a small group moves into a large group. However, they are the powerless. So they try to, there is a mobility towards an already existing political scenario. You have to adjust rather than you imposing a language. So you adjust. As a result, rapid assimilation results in language shift. Again, through a stage of language bilingualism, often, but gradually towards total shift. For example, some countries in the Western European countries, till some time back, they did not insist on working knowledge in their language to get a visa. But these days, a certain level of language competence is required. And for citizenship, of course, you have to speak the language very well. So if you are in France, you have to you have to speak French. If you're in Germany, you have to speak German, and so on. However much we disagree or dislike the pattern, this is how it is. So if you migrate to their country, you better learn their country, learn their language. So a rapid assimilation happens here as opposed to in case of war and conquest. But remember, in both these cases, a particular stage of bilingualism might be part of that shift on part of the people who are undergoing the change. Then third, of course, is the family level interaction. This is very interesting from a theoretical standpoint, because sometimes we have had really strange outcomes, which we will discuss. But this is not as rampant as the first two reasons. So a linguistic group is incorporated into another as spouses, or sometimes even as slaves, refugees, servants, and so on, and some or as equal members of the tribe, and so on and so forth. Intermarriage doesn't just mean in today's world, but in the earlier period, this used to happen in many tribal societies, where marrying within the tribe was considered unacceptable. So the brides had to be always from a different tribe. So naturally, this had its results. Sometimes they also took in slaves. So slaves became part of the family. The slaves within the family, like large part of US had. So that also has an impact. So family level interaction includes all of these kinds of interactions. So intermarriage on a prolonged and large scale interferes with the language structure of the community in question. So because what happens, a newcomer, typically the wives, will have to adopt a new language with imperfections. So suppose somebody comes from a different tribe into an existing tribe or a group or whatever, and they have to learn the husband's language, husband's community's language. And typically when you come there as a bride, you are not anymore a child. So language learning at a later age becomes a slightly difficult proposition. So often what happens, they learn it imperfectly for various reasons, because there is no formal training, nobody cares to teach them, but you are expected to learn, and so on and so forth, resulting into an imperfect learning of the language. And those mothers will pass on that language to the children. Gradually, over a period of time, the language structure itself might change. This is another possibility that happens. Also in this category, you can include marriages of settlers with the native women. Native women, I would like to put in quotes. So settlers often, for example, Chinese traders in Indonesia, they married the native, quote unquote, native women, so local women basically. And then this also creates a very different scenario. In fact, there is a language called Chindo, which is a mixture of Chinese and Indonesian that those children grew up speaking. So it's a mixture of languages. So this is also a possibility, possible outcome of language contact of a very different kind, which is at the family level. Now, social level, as I was mentioning before, that a linguistic area is created. So high degree of bilingualism is allowed when you are in social contact with many different groups. Like in Jharkhand, for example, speakers of various languages have a very strong social connection with each other, and they are capable of learning each other's language, communicate with each other's language. The same happens also in the Northeast India, and this creates a steady bilingualism, high degree of bilingualism among speakers of adjacent languages which may or may not be genetically different. Genetically, they belong to different language families. Now, this kind of contact affects all areas of language, but most importantly, the area of phonology. Phonology means the sound system of a particular language. This is one. And the last but not the least, the results that we are talking about is a trade situation. What happens in the case of a trade situation? Need for communication between groups of people and trade purpose. This creates what we call a lingua franca. Lingua franca is a language of communication for a particular purpose. So traders coming into another country, another location, and talking to people of that location for trade purposes only creates a lingua franca. For example, in Jharkhand again, the marketplace created a language called Sadri. Now it is a language on its own term, but how it started was the Hindi speakers and the local tribal language speakers and various other communities created a language, created a lingua franca, which is Hindi based, but it has a lot of components from all those languages that are present in the area. So Sadri as a language started as a lingua franca. Similarly, you have what is called a Nagamese in the northeast. So it's a mixture of Naga and Assamese. One of the Naga varieties, probably Ao. So and that happened typically because of the trade scenario between the Assamese and the Naga groups. So this kind of creation of language also happens because of a necessity to communicate. You need to communicate. There is no slavery in question here. There is no other such scenario. But you need to communicate to a group of people who don't speak your language. As simple as that. And you create. Humans are brilliant in that way. We find a way out. And this is one of those ways out. So lingua francas are created. Now, lingua francas, of course, have various kinds of manifestation. Sometimes it is Nagamese, which is a very simple kind of a lingua franca, but sometimes, for example, in the plantation scenario, the workforce and the plantation owners do not share the language. What happens in this kind of a situation is the creation of a language which we call pidgin. This gives rise to the creation of a pidgin. It is written as Pidgin, pidgins and creoles. So these are various kinds of outcomes. So maybe we can start, discussing these outcomes, talking about these outcomes one by one. Let's start with the last that we mentioned, pidgins and creoles. Are you with me till now? Are you following me? Is there any question? Is there any trouble? Am I speaking as fast as I was speaking yesterday? Please let me know. Somebody please volunteer. Till here, if everything is clear. It has been a monologue, so let me know.
Yes, ma'am, everything's fine.
Oh.
Ma'am, some words
Oh.
are not clear, like hello.
Like? Yes, go ahead.
Like you said, there is some language in Jharkhand called, I guess Sadri means. I'm not sure.
Yes, Sadri. Sadri.
Some names are not clear.
No, I will be adding all of this to the handout. Right now, you just get the concept. You get the concept as in what at the level of at the theoretical level, how we are differentiating the different kinds of contacts, and because of the difference between the contact scenario, what kind of outcomes are possible. So you just get that the terms and jargon will be there in the handouts. Don't worry. There will be many jargons. I'll try and explain all of them, but don't worry about that. As of now, you just follow the theoretical aspect of it. Any other question? Any other doubt? Overall, if the points are clear, that is what I want to know. Of course, there are many other things, but that is fine. That will be there. Okay, since there is no problem, so I'll go ahead with the slavery situation, because this is one extreme of the spectrum. So there is, as you have already seen, there are various kinds of communication, there are various kinds of contacts, language contacts, and there are various kinds of categories into which you can box them into. And as a result, you have various kinds of results, various kinds of outcomes. Now, these outcomes are, they are not airtight compartments. There is a continuum. Slavery is one end of that continuum. Slavery is one extreme situation where you have people coming in contact. However, the contact is very, very restricted. There is no social contact between the groups or among the groups, and it is not. Nobody looks forward to contact. Also, it is really restricted. You are not allowed, and so on. So what as a result of which we also have a very, very strange or very different kind of outcome that typically is part of this kind of a scenario. So what is that? It is called a pidgin. Pidgin is Pidgin. Is what is a pidgin? It is a system of communication. It is a language in its own right that is used by people who do not understand each other's language, but they need to communicate with one another for trading or other purposes. Pigeons are typically a product of such a scenario. Sometimes they are part of the slavery condition, sometimes they are not. So as I said, there are also possibilities of trade situation without slavery. In both cases, pigeons can be created. So Nagami started as a pigeon, went on to become a Creole without the slavery aspect. However, many pigeons that were given, many pigeons came out of the plantations in all over Africa, whether it was a plantation owned by the Dutch or owned by the Portuguese or owned by the British or the French and so on. You might have noticed a lot of the erstwhile French colonies in Africa where they speak perfect French. So to come to that stage, they have gone through various stages, starting with a pigeon. So a pigeon is, what is the purpose of creating a pigeon? Pigeon is a very strange, if you may, kind of a structure where the dominant language, that is the language of the master, is the base language. Base language as in the language on which the communication system is created. So to give you an example of a pigeon, I'm just this is a pigeon from Papua New Guinea. I'm reading it out to you from the textbook. This is a sentence like this. I quote: "Suppose you kai plenty peanut, buy you come up strong wholesome phantom." It is funny to listen to it, but I'll just repeat. Suppose you kai plenty peanut, buy you come up strong wholesome phantom. Now this sounds somewhat, you may say, somewhat like English language. That is because it is a pidgin that is English based. Suppose, the word suppose comes from the English word suppose. Similarly, you have you is you. Kai again is not an English word. It is taken from one of the local languages, which means to eat. It sounds similar to Hindi. And plenty is of course plenty. Peanut is peanut. Buy is in time. Come up matlab you will become. Come up has been changed into to mean become. So if you eat lots of peanuts, you will become strong like phantom. Also matlab like. So this is an example of a pigeon. I will send all these examples in the handout shortly. So this what happens is that because the purpose is immediate and practical need of communication, so you just create something, some very simplified version of a language for this kind of scenario. Because why is it English based? You may ask. It is English based because the master is not obliged to understand the native language. So in a plantation that has slaves from Africa, from India, and from other places, broken into small groups purposefully so that they don't revolt, they don't have the numbers to revolt, and they cannot communicate even among themselves in one language. This is a very strange scenario. So in that case, you need to create a communication pattern that the master will understand easily and they themselves can also follow. Hence, they create a language that is derived from a normal, quote unquote, normal language through simplification. They simplify the language to such an extent that it doesn't anymore resemble the language from which it is derived. For example, you take another example. Phantom, you print true belong me. Phantom, somebody is asking Phantom the character. You print true belong me. You is you, brain is friend, true is true, belong me, my friend. Phantom, you are my true friend. So if you, this is how it will look like in a pidgin language when you translate. So what is happening here is the immediate and practical need to communicate. Anyhow, somehow, you create a system that helps you communicate, right? As a result of which, it is typically very simplified and very reduced in complexity. The grammatical structures of preposition, complex syntactic structure, none of those things are present in a pidgin. So pidgins are one outcome of trade situation, both in slavery as well as trade situation that does not have slavery. Since I am giving examples, I think it is better reading the examples out is very difficult. But I hope you got the point. Did you get the point? What I mean by a pidgin? Animesh?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, who was that? Please
Ma'am,
identify.
Chelsea
Yes, ma'am, you
Dixon.
called my name.
Yes, I called Animesh Kumar to tell me because I see you logged in. So can you tell me, is everything clear?
Yes, ma'am. So far.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. So, so what is a pidgin then? A pidgin is a simplified language that is created in trade scenario where social contact is minimum. However, people need to people need to communicate, and they need a language. Typically, the language of the master, the language of the more powerful is the base language, and there are some inputs from the other less powerful languages into the system. However, the entire system is extremely simplified, extremely reduced in grammatical complexity, and so on. I gave an example of an English-based pidgin in that is spoken in Papua New Guinea. The interesting part is that pidgin, over a period of time, has become a language in its own right, and that is the official language of Papua New Guinea. You might find it interesting, but this is
Pigeon can I also created due to the marriage factor because mother.
Yes, but that typically doesn't happen. Typically doesn't happen because when in a marriage situation, you don't have a restriction on learning each other's language. So you can, and eventually people do, depending on the power equation. So you can, suppose you marry somebody from a different language, and you just force your wife to learn the language, or your wife forces you to learn Tamil or whatever. That happens. That possibility exists. But in pidgin, in case of a pidgin scenario, that possibility itself is absent. So you simply have no choice. Marriage situation, that problem is not there. No, you can learn each other's language, or you can choose to speak each other's language, or whatever. It can be either way. And hence typically in families we don't create pigeons. What happens is, of course, there are funny outcomes here as well. We have something called a mixed language that we will discuss, but these are very rare, very rare. They don't always happen. Otherwise, so many of us will be, speaking in such varieties of languages. That doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen in some situations, which we will discuss in the next class, which is called a mixed language. Typically, because the power equation, theoretically at least, is kind of balanced. But you see, in trade scenario, or typically in a slavery situation, in plantations and so on, the power equation is skewed to one side very heavily. So you simply have no choice but to create this kind of a scenario. And so Papua New Guinea had created a pigeon that is English based. Similarly, you have Dutch based pigeon in many African countries, French based pigeon, and so on and so forth. What we mean by French based pigeon? This is, here comes a technical term, we call it lexifier source language. Lexifier means the language that gives the lexicon. Lexicon is the word. So the majority of words, most important words, come from the more powerful language, source language. Source is the language from where you get the word. So English-based pidgin means English is the lexifier source language. So you get most of the words. For example, I give you another example of a different use of an English word in Papua New Guinea. Again, the water for sea is long water. So the word for sea or ocean is long water. Now ocean, so this is what we mean by simplification. You learn the word for water in English, and then you have to learn the other kinds of manifestations of water like pond and lake and river and ocean and sea and so on. That's too much of complexity, right? So what they have done is they have created a semantic manifestation with using the same word. So long water, LONG, long water is the ocean, the sea. So wherever you see a lot of water is long water. So if you have to say I went to the sea, you have to use the word long water rather than sea. This is what I mean by simplification. Similarly, for all other pigeons, I'll give you many examples, and you can also Google them. There are all those things available on Google. Just type Papua New Guinea Creole or in Papua New Guinea Pidgin, you find all these examples. So this is so that what are the typical features of a pigeon? Then typical features are that they are derived from one normal language, and this is spoken non-natively. Non-natively, matlab nobody has a pigeon as their native language. This is not my first language. I might learn Nagamese, but Nagamese is not my first language. My first language will be whatever language I speak at home. This is what is meant by non-natively. So all the Papua New Guinea speakers were actually slaves taken from various countries, various places. Their own language. Even Papua New Guineans, they had their own language, but those languages were spoken natively, so they were their first language. They also spoke a pidgin as a second language. It is a means of communication with the other group, self and the other group, out group, which is not part of your within the group communication. So it is never an intra-group communicative tool. It is always an inter-group communication tool. And of course, it is the simplest possible form, and it is specially constructed to suit the specific needs arising out of the contact situation, right? So it is a specific need is to take order and abide by the order of the master, and that is it. As a result, the vocabulary and the construction will be severely restricted and typically used for only those purposes. So you cannot have, for example, in a plantation, a pidgin that has come out in a plantation scenario will not have words for philosophy and the cosmos and so on. It will have simple words for to be used in that scenario only. That is how it starts. You do not have too much of what do you say, a very complex vocabulary at all. You will have a very restricted vocabulary. So this is where I think I should stop. I will by today I will create the slide and I'll have adequate examples so that you can see and understand the jargon and the terms. Also, I'll be able to use more examples in that case. So is it fine till here? Everybody? Abhijit, Veer, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
you oh, okay, great. So you followed?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, so I will randomly ask some people. So because this is what I do in class, so this is something that I'm this is how I in a typical normal um, um, pre-COVID era I used to teach. I will just ask randomly if there is any problem. So that is how it is. So I think we can stop here. Tomorrow I will have the slides ready and we will discuss creoles and mixed languages and all many other such things. Right?
I have a question.
Yes.
Ma'am, is there any suggested book for this course?
The thing is, the way the course is structured, it is not a typical course. So you will not have a textbook or that will cover the entire course. But I will give you some material that will cover parts. So for this, so module wise, I will suggest you reading. Okay, there is no one book because this the way I'm teaching it is not typically practiced. Yes, somebody is speaking.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Somebody else was saying something in between. So yes, there is no the textbook, but I will suggest some readings from here there. I'll upload material for you to read up and understand what the whole thing is all about.